thanks everyone who is joining us today. So today, like Shubh already explained, we are doing another in a series of webinars that Newslaundry is doing in partnership with the Indian Data Portal, which has been incubated at the Indian Business School. Today's topic is how data can help cover India's caste reality. Now, it would not be an exaggeration to say that caste is the fundamental socio-political and economic reality of Indian society. There's an aspect of Indian society, I think, that's not influenced by or influences caste dynamics. So for this reason, caste is often not an easy subject for journalists to cover for a variety of reasons. I mean, that we'll get to during the course of this discussion. Today, what we'll discuss is, can data help journalists better capture and convey the caste dynamics of this country? That's what we are going to discuss in this session. And with me today are Meena Kotwal, who is a journalist at the Shudra, Dilip C Mandal, an executive committee member of the Editors Guild of India and former managing editor of India Today Hindi magazine, Cynthia Stephen, an independent policy researcher, analyst, and independent journalist, and Dr. Ashwini Chhatre, who is the executive director of the Bharti Institute of Public Policy at the Indian School of Business, which has created the India Data Portal. So before we get into the discussion, let me invite Dr. Ashwini to give us a small presentation about the data set they have created related to caste and how it can help journalists to cover caste better in this country. Over to you, Dr. Ashwini.
Thank you, Mehraj. I will take a few minutes to lay out what we wanted to start and accomplish. I hope you can see my screen. This is the landing page of the India Data Portal. The ambition is to put all publicly available data in ways that can be linked to each other. So caste data that can be linked to water data, rainfall data that can be linked to flood data and so on. And in a way that people can interact with. Our target is to introduce this to journalists so that their stories can be enriched by using data on the background of the stories that they are reporting on. So the India Data Portal is now almost 1 year old. It will be a year in January. And it has, of course, a long way to go before we meet our ambition of covering all public data. But we have made rapid progress, and there are several opportunities for journalists, for researchers, for civil society organizations, for activists to use the portal to interact with the data, to visualize the data in the best possible way that works for them, and download it to be used in pamphlets, in reports, in journal articles, in newspaper reports, and so on. To this end, I would like to take a few more minutes to introduce you to what kind of caste data is available. So there are two levels here. One is the ability of the portal to record caste as a dimension so that a user can compare scheduled caste versus scheduled tribes, compared to OBC, compared to others, or compared to all the whole population and so on, so that one can make comparisons about the caste dimension of an outcome. For example, we have a data on land holdings, and this data is available, of course, in multiple dimensions, but one of the very important dimensions is scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. And the portal allows a user to visualize this data in ways that can show at the state level or at the district level what is the difference between the average holding or total area under holdings owned by scheduled castes compared to others, or compared to all, and so on, compared to the average. That is one aspect of it, that we can look at one data set, holdings, irrigated land, crops that are being grown, cash crops, vegetables, loans that are being provided. All of this data is available within a data set. But the second aspect that I want to emphasize is the comparison. The India Data Portal allows a user, and the ability is still restricted a little bit. It's not open to all data sets and all indicators in each data set, but there is an expanding scope for comparing variables across data sets. So, for example, we can take data from the census on the total number of scheduled castes at the district level, and then compare it to the number of scheduled caste holdings that are irrigated. And we can see the difference there when we compare scheduled caste holdings to general category holdings, and we will see that the proportion of general category holdings that have irrigation is much more in comparison to its proportion in the population. So it allows you to compare population data set to irrigation data set using social categories. I believe, and this is just an example, there are so many different data sets in the India Data Portal that allow these kind of analysis using different social categories. It is important because caste is not a dimension in itself. It is not enough to know how many scheduled caste members are there in a self-help group, or how many scheduled caste households get labor and employment from NREGA. It is equally important to find out the effects of all of these. Are villages and districts that have higher scheduled caste population also getting more investments in sanitation, in irrigation, more subsidies for fertilizers, and so on and so forth? It is the disparities at that level that become important when we discuss caste. And the more data that we can use to strengthen our arguments, the better and easier it will be for discussions around caste to be grounded in the reality that we have in front of us. A lot of data sets are recent and allow the user to explore, to begin with, what are the differences both by caste group as well as across the geography of India, and approach it in a way by searching. So you can see the search and visualize. There is a search facility where you can type text, or look at all the tablets that are available to a casual user. It is a very intuitive website, and any user who can create a user ID and log in very easily should be able to create graphics very, very quickly. For those who want to do better and create better graphics, we have several training programs that are available, and in collaboration with Newslaundry as well as other partners such as India Spend, we are in the process, and we are already offering many of these trainings in 6 Indian languages, so that this resource can be made available not only to those reporting in English, but also in all the languages for which we have already provided, and which we will continue to expand to other languages. Mehraj, I will stop there, and either I will just take questions at the end, or the panelists themselves will have something to say about their experience in the use of data and reporting on caste. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for that. But I'll just ask you this one thing. I mean, how difficult was it to collect this data? I'm asking because I'm sure a lot of this data came out of government reports and other data sets, and the Indian government doesn't have a very sterling reputation when it comes to providing data. I mean, we have seen what has happened with GDP data, and I mean, there was this mass migration of migrants going back home during the pandemic. We still don't know officially how many people perished in that. So in that context, how difficult was it to gather all this data?
So a lot of data is open, and we start with the data that is publicly available. And even that is not easy because it is provided in formats that are interoperable. They are sort of PDFs or Excel or just bad websites with old technology. And this is when the government wants to make the data available. But in many cases, we are very fortunate that the government is required by law and by constitution to provide the data in segregated form for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. That is a requirement. So all NSS surveys, for example, the National Sample Survey Organization that carries out a large number of studies through surveys, is legally required to report separately on scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. So these reports are provided in PDF forms as tables at the state level. And we have used those reports that are made available to compile this data and make it available for users.
Dilipji, let me come to you. You saw the presentation of Dr. Ashwini, and like he explained, a lot of the data that is available, I mean, apart from their portal, is often very incomprehensible to an average journalist. So given that, do you think data sets like the one IDP has created, how effective and how helpful could it be for journalists to better capture and better convey the caste dynamics of this country?
Thank you, Mehraj. I think without data, doing journalism now is not possible. Now, at least if you talk about good journalism, data is very important. But the problem with India is, as Ashwini is also saying, and you have noticed him saying that he's talking about what? He's mostly talking about the data regarding scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. These are the two social categories for which some data is available in the government domain and public domain. Many universities and institutions are trying to gather, collate, or whatever to do with that data. So the prime problem in India doing sociology or journalism or even political science is that of not having data regarding almost 78% of our population. We don't have any data. Since I think the last census that collected data regarding all the social groups was in 1931. So we are a strange country in a sense, which is, I don't know why, we are afraid of data. We don't know how many upper castes, whatever term you use, Dwej or Savarn or general. This is a very problematic term which Ashwini used, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and general, as if scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, they have caste and others are above caste or not related to any caste. So we don't have data related to upper caste, we don't have data related to OBCs, and without having this data, doing data journalism in India is almost impossible. So you see so many anomalies there. 3 or 4 days back, I was going through a report in the print, and I am associated with that portal in some or other way. A reporter wrote that there are 15% Bhumihars are there in Bihar. And this is, nobody is actually asking how you come to the conclusion that a certain caste, A, B, or C, has these many voters or whatever percentage of voters. So even we take the case of sociology. When we talk about caste, it's always about scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, and the binary is scheduled caste and scheduled tribe and others or general. So we are actually doing all the policy things, journalism, sociology, or political science, without having any credible data regarding OBCs and general caste. So all the comparisons, even if you talk about the comparative analysis of different castes, we just lack the data. And the last time one exercise was undertaken by Government of India in 2011, and that you all are aware that Socioeconomic Caste Census, SECC, and that data was not released. So one or other caste says we are backward and so give reservation to us, and government can't counter their demand with a data set that, look, your number is this and you are represented in these numbers or percentage in different government jobs or whatever, whichever is fair. They don't have this tool or the methodology to counter their arguments. So it's problematic in a huge way that we don't have data, and some sort of data is available because of National Family Health Survey or NSS or all that, but that's not very comprehensive and reliable. So I think the prime problem in doing data journalism in India is we are a strange country where we don't have data regarding our different social groups. Can you imagine US doing census operation without enumerating whites or Hispanics, or Argentina doing census operation without counting mulattoes or Hispanics or mulattoes, whatever you say. So whosoever is dominating or should not be enumerated is a strange philosophy of Indian political class, and that's why I think it's a huge problem. But still, whatsoever data is available and made available to journalists, I think that should be utilized, though it's sometimes not very comprehensive or comprehensible, and that's a big problem. So we are in a tunnel without most of the tunnel is not lit, and we just look around and find something and just write ये जाति इतनी है, ये जाति इतनी है, इस चुनाव में इस जाति कितने लोग हैं. This is all absurd. We don't know anything. We have 1931 data, and due to migration and all that, everything had changed. And can you imagine, even in the census, and even regarding to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, prior to 2011, we don't have any enumeration block level data. We have ward level data, which is around 30,000 to 2 lakhs in different states. So we can't see the data regarding the segregation of scheduled caste in urban or rural localities. So I think in India, the dominating philosophy is not to enumerate or not to see caste, as if not seeing caste will make India casteless, and I think that hasn't proved correct. So this is my introductory thing, and I will respond to other questions, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia ji, I mean, as a researcher, you are engaged with, you not only look for data, you not only study caste, you also, I'm sure, look at the media coverage of it. But like Dilip ji used a very good metaphor that we are in a tunnel, most of which is not lit because you don't have data, because you don't understand it properly. So in that situation, how do you cover it, and how does it reflect in the coverage of the media when it comes to caste?
I was just thinking while you were the first presenter was talking about the data, Ashwin, and then also Dilip ji was speaking. I was just thinking about how I have encountered the lack of encounters on caste-related information. A lot of my work has had to do with rural women. A lot of my work, and if you look at it, the role of women in agriculture, for instance, has always been the best kept secret in Indian economic activities, whatever. So in the policy also there is no mention of women as an important factor there. Whereas if you know that 67% of the physical labor used in agriculture, according to some very old data, you're right, we don't have updated data on these things because researchers don't seem to care about it. So we have some very old data saying that 67% of the manual labor involved in agriculture in India is provided by women, and the vast number of women involved in agriculture are landless agricultural laborers. And of course, by definition, that would mean a large number of Dalit and Adivasi women. So the thing is that the invisibility of women in the sector, in any kind of data, even the SC/ST data that you're talking about, Ashwin said that by law we are required to give SC/ST data. It's not gender disaggregated. The data that you get on caste is not gender disaggregated. So you don't when you talk about agricultural labor, you're not talking about the women who provide that. That is not, the labor data is not gender disaggregated in any systematic manner. And I think this is the biggest bugbear. And also on the positive side, the contributions are not, therefore, not even recorded. I think for me, it's like the hounds of Baskerville. Why did the dogs bark? This is the question. Why is there no data? Why are women not mentioned? The invisibility of the data is of women in the data is very, very crucial. And I would also say that it's not only in agriculture. If you look at other economic activities, by definition, and also the point is that because Dalits are confined by convention and by ritual exclusion to certain practices, they cannot, for instance, set up a restaurant and hope to make a go of it because of the stigma attached to the to their and food. They can produce the food, but they cannot cook it and serve it. There's a ritual prohibition there, taboo there. So therefore, you find that I just was recently saying that when you look at explore data relating to economic activities, there's a high level of participation of Dalits in the leather industry for obvious reasons, because of the fact that it is linked to their traditional occupation, tanning and so on. So there is so you will see that this ancient practices that the economic activities and the professional activities, the way people make a livelihood, continue to reflect in present day India even in the 21st century. So this is something that I think we need to take note of. And you're right that data is something that and I've also written a very detailed article, I remember some years back, because in Karnataka, we've done a caste, census, but it was done 4 years ago, and it's a huge political hot potato. And the Backward Classes Commission has conducted the report. It's almost through. A small section of it was leaked. When they saw that it was politically sensitive, they've held up the release of it by not appointing a chief for the Backward Class Commission. Just last week, a Backward Class Commission chief was appointed and they said now that the chief is there, the data may be released. So it is true that there's a lot of politics involved, politics of power involved. Up to now, there is a myth that certain politically dominant groups are in large numbers in the state. But the data that has been collected on the ground shows that the marginalized sections are larger in number. And this is the reason they're refusing to release the report. It's really unfortunate that we as a community are afraid of this.
What I wanted to ask is, how does all this, the lack of data, the paucity of data, the very incomprehensibility of it, how does it reflect in media's coverage of caste? What have you seen in your experience?
This is a very crucial point that you're making. Because of the lack of data, unless you're particularly sensitized to this question, people are used to just taking what the government covers and maybe something that some researchers may pick and then use that as the data without challenging the lack of data or asking why there is no data on how on where the money is going. For instance, there is a SC/ST component plan where so much of money is put in the budget and supposed to be utilized for SC/STs in agriculture, in the state agriculture budget or the government's agriculture budget. There is no, other than that, there are, and then there is also a women's component plan where so much money is supposed to be spent on women. Where is that money going? Then there's no data, because there's no gender disaggregated data on caste in the, in the agriculture sector. You don't know how many women, it's a joke that women own land. Because the rule will say the land has to be in the woman's name. Come on, which farmer will put his land in his wife's name or his daughter's name? It's not happening. Some people do, where they're sure of controlling that woman, they do, and then they manage to access. So there has to be some media sensitization also on the lack of data and the meaning of that, the political meaning of that. Because the lack of data, if there is a lack of data on something, that means that it's a political hot potato. We have to be aware of this. And that is why the data is hidden so carefully. And it is true, you know, I don't know what to say. It's really unfortunate that we are, as a country, are so defensive about our great heritage and, you know, all our culture. But we are so mendacious, so willing to hide facts, so willing to bury the truth when it comes to hardcore facts and data and realities about what is on the ground here, particularly where it affects the vulnerable sections. And I think our reporters are not serious enough in uncovering this. The only person I know who's done a serious job of this sort of thing is our, Sainath. After that, I've rarely seen people raising such sharp questions. And I think though he has been mentoring generations of journalists, I think our young people still, there needs to be a lot of sensitization. And that brings me to the other issue of the lack of diversity in media. It is because
I'll come to that. That is my
rural young people.
Cynthia ji, I'll come to that, but I'll bring in Meena ji first. How do you respond to Cynthia ji saying that most journalists don't really, like, either they don't bother about data when telling stories, or they just don't understand data? So how valuable is data to tell stories, especially about caste? And do journalists actually bother about these things? Because I mean, I have been a journalist for 10, 11 years now, and mostly in my career, I've been an editor. So I've seen, like, every other story which is based on data either doesn't understand the data or just like puts it out there because it has to be there without it telling any story. So what do you say about that?
एक जर्नलिस्ट ही नहीं बल्कि कोई भी अगर डेटा बेस्ड स्टोरी करना चाहेगा तो उसको प्रॉब्लम तो होती ही है। दिलीप जी ने बताया और सिंथिया मैम ने बताया कि 1931 के बाद डेटा है ही नहीं हमारे पास कास्ट को लेकर। तो क्या कारण है कि डेटा बाहर ही नहीं आ रहा? अभी मैं दिलीप जी की एक स्टोरी पढ़ रही थी कि 5,000 करोड़ जो है खर्च किए गए थे कि डेटा जो है सामने आए, जाति आधारित जो है आंकड़ा वो सामने आए, लेकिन वो बाहर ही नहीं लाया गया। ऐसी मैं एक स्टोरी कर रही थी, 2-3 साल पहले ही स्टोरी कर रही थी एक, कि किस रेप के ऊपर वो स्टोरी थी, कौन सी कास्ट की जो महिलाएं हैं उनके रेप ज़्यादा होते हैं, क्योंकि दिन में एनसीआरबी के अकॉर्डिंग एक दिन में हर घंटे में 4 रेप होते हैं। तो उसमें कौन सी महिलाएं हैं जिनके रेप ज़्यादा होते हैं, लेकिन आंकड़ा है ही नहीं। तो इसमें बहुत प्रॉब्लम होती है, चाहे वो जर्नलिस्ट हो चाहे कोई भी हो। तो मुझे तो बहुत प्रॉब्लम हुई थी कि आंकड़े हैं ही नहीं। जब जाति आधारित आंकड़े ही नहीं हैं तो उसमें महिलाओं का कहाँ से लेकर आएंगे, कौन सी महिला के साथ जो है रेप हो रहे हैं या कुछ भी ऐसी घटना हो रही है। सर जो है बार बार इसका दावा करती है कि जो है जाति आधारित आंकड़े बाहर आने चाहिए, चाहे वो यूपीए की सरकार हो चाहे एनडीए की सरकार हो, लेकिन फिर भी नहीं आते हैं। तो ये बहुत ही दुख वाली बात है। दिलीप जी ने ही बताया कि हमारा ही एक ऐसा देश है जहाँ पे जाति आधारित जो है आंकड़े बाहर आते ही नहीं हैं, जबकि कहीं भी ऐसा नहीं होता है। तो इस देश में क्या हम कहें, कौन चाहता है कि जाति के ऊपर जो आंकड़े हैं वो बाहर आने ही नहीं चाहिए? कौन है ऐसा? 1931 के बाद क्यों नहीं है जो जाति के आधार पे हैं आंकड़े नहीं आए हैं? और भी जैसे अभी मैं बिहार कवरेज में कर रही थी, तो यहाँ के चुनाव में मैं देख रही हूँ कि कई सारी जो है जाति, बिहार में बहुत सारी जातियाँ हैं। एक रिपोर्ट में मैं देख रही थी, क्विंट की एक रिपोर्ट है जिसमें बताया गया है कि 46 लाख जो हैं जातियाँ हैं दर्ज की गई हैं, उसके अलावा भी हो सकती हैं, लेकिन 46 लाख जातियाँ हैं, उसके बारे में पता ही नहीं है लोगों को कि कौन सी जाति के कितने लोग हैं, कौन सी जाति को है कितना फ़ायदा होना चाहिए। इतने सारे फंड बना दिए जाते हैं, इतने सारे जो हैं स्कीम चला दी जाती हैं, लेकिन किसको क्या मिल रहा है किसी को पता ही नहीं है, क्योंकि आंकड़े ही नहीं है, जातियों के आधार पे आंकड़े है ही नहीं, पता ही नहीं है कौन सी जाति के कितने लोग हैं, शहरों में कितने हैं, गाँव में कितने हैं, कुछ पता ही नहीं है। तो वो फंड कहाँ जा रहा है, वो स्कीम कहाँ जा रही है, कुछ पता नहीं है। सिर्फ ऊपर ऊपर ही वो जो है दे दी जाती है जिनके बारे में पता है। अब जैसे यहाँ पे मैंने डोम के ऊपर काम किया था, तो डोम के बारे में कहीं पे कोई रिपोर्ट ही नहीं है, तो उनके आंकड़े कहाँ से आएंगे। तो इस तरह की दिक्कतें बहुत होती है एक जर्नलिस्ट के तौर पर, और आप भी इसमें काम कर चुके हैं, एक जर्नलिस्ट हैं, तो आपको भी पता है कि कितनी दिक्कतें होती हैं। हमारे पास कोई चारा नहीं रह जाता कि जब आंकड़े ही नहीं है तो हम अपनी रिपोर्ट में क्या दिखाएंगे, तो वो दिक्कतें तो होती ही हैं। तो फिर ना चाहते हुए भी हमें 1931 का जो है डेटा देना पड़ता है, क्योंकि और उसके बाद है ही नहीं। 2011 में जब हुए तो वो डेटा बाहर ही नहीं आया, तो उसके अलावा हमारे पास और कोई चारा नहीं। और दिक्कतें इसमें सच में बहुत होती ही हैं, क्योंकि हम लोग जब काम करते हैं तो उसमें डेटा बहुत ज़रूरी होता है अपनी स्टोरी को स्ट्रॉन्ग बनाने के लिए। और वो वहाँ पे वो जो है हम पूरी मेहनत कर लेते हैं, लेकिन कहीं किसी कमी की वजह से हमारे स्टोरी में वो कमी रह जाती है।
तो जैसा आप कह रही हैं कि डेटा न होने की वजह से स्टोरी में कमी रह जाती है, तो उससे क्या असर पड़ता है जब हम ये दलित इश्यूज, शेड्यूल ट्राइब इश्यूज या बाकी ऐसे इश्यूज की कवरेज की बात करते हैं? तो डेटा न होने की वजह से ऐसा नहीं है कि सारे जर्नलिस्ट इसमें उनका कोई लेना देना नहीं है डेटा के साथ, या दे आर नॉट इंटरेस्टेड इन दैट, लेकिन जो लोग हैं जो चाहते हैं कि डेटा के जरिए अपनी स्टोरी बताएं, लेकिन उनको डेटा मिल नहीं रहा है और स्टोरी लाइक जैसे आप कह रही हैं कि कमजोर होती है, तो ये इश्यूज कवर करने में क्या दिक्कतें आती हैं उस वजह से?
दिक्कतें वही सब, जब मैंने बताया ना कि जब मैं एक रेप के ऊपर एक स्टोरी कर रही थी, चूरू में उस टाइम पे एक रेप हुआ था, तो उस पर मैं एक डेटा सर्च कर रही थी कि कितनी महिलाओं के रेप कौन सी जातियों के ज़्यादा होते हैं। तो वो हम लोग स्ट्रॉन्ग स्टोरी को बना ही नहीं पाते हैं, क्योंकि हमारे पास वो आंकड़ों की कमी रहती है। और जब वो आंकड़े नहीं आते तो पढ़ने वाले को भी लगता है कि डेटा की कमी है, क्योंकि जो भी कोई अच्छी खासी रिपोर्ट पढ़ना चाहेगा वो डेटा भी ढूंढता है कि कहाँ किसके साथ क्या हुआ, कितना परसेंटेज हुआ, कौन सी जो है संख्या किसकी ज़्यादा थी, किसकी कम थी, लेकिन वो चीज़ें बाहर नहीं आ। तो उसमें क्या करना पड़ता है, हमें फिर ऊपर ऊपर से कुछ कुछ कवर करना पड़ता है। एक परसेंटेज हमें 1931 के हिसाब से लगाना पड़ता है, या फिर हमें मोटा मोटा लगाना पड़ता है कि लगभग इतने लोग होंगे, लगभग इतने लोग नहीं होंगे, तो हमें वो मोटा मोटा करना पड़ता है। लेकिन वो एक मुकम्मल जो स्टोरी होती है वो नहीं आ पाती, क्योंकि उसमें आंकड़ों की कमी रहती है। क्योंकि अब इसमें जो है सरकार ही बाहर नहीं आने दे रही है आंकड़े, और इसकी वजह से अब हम देख रहे हैं देश में कि आरक्षण पर भी सवाल किया जा रहा है, जबकि राम मनोहर लोहिया ने कहा था कि जितनी जिसकी भागीदारी उसको उतना, सॉरी मैं वो पूरी लाइन भूल रही हूँ, जिसके जिसके जितनी जनसंख्या उसकी उतनी भागीदारी, कुछ ऐसी एक लाइन उन्होंने कही थी। तो वो जो जनसंख्या है वो बाहर ही नहीं आ रही है, तो उसकी भागीदारी कैसे पता चलेगी। और इस वजह से जगह बार बार जो है आरक्षण पे सवाल उठते हैं, या जाति के आधार पर जो सवाल उठते हैं कि क्यों जो है जातियों को जो है बाहर नहीं आने देते हैं, और वो सवाल जो है हमारी स्टोरीज में कमी रह जाती हैं। अभी मैं जैसे मैं भी जाति के ऊपर जो आजकल बहुत स्टोरीज कर रही हूँ, तो मेरे पास वो आंकड़े ही नहीं है, मुझे पता ही नहीं चल रहा है कि कहाँ पे कितनी जातियाँ हैं, कहाँ के कितनी जाति के लोग हैं। वो मुझे घूम घूम के पता चलना पड़ रहा है। और एक अभी कल एक नई जाति मुझे पता चली थी, जाति का नाम मुझे नहीं पता है, लेकिन वो शायद जो सिलबट्टे जो बनाते हैं उनकी भी एक अलग जाति होती है, और उनकी जाति के लोग जो हैं सिर्फ सिलबट्टे ही बनाते हैं। मुझे नहीं पता था इसके बारे में, ना मुझे कहीं पढ़ने को मिला इसके बारे में, मैंने गूगल भी किया, मुझे कहीं पढ़ने को भी नहीं मिल रहा था इसके बारे में। तो वो चीज़ें बाहर ही नहीं आ पाती है, तो हम कैसे अपनी स्टोरी को स्ट्रॉन्ग बनाएं, हम कैसे पता करें कि कौन सी जो है जाति के लोग कहाँ कैसे रह रहे हैं, वो कितने स्ट्रॉन्ग है कितने नहीं हैं, कुछ पता नहीं चलता इसके बारे में।
जी, Dilip ji, I mean, we have covered how the lack of data, the problems it presents in coverage, but there is, I think, a danger if we over rely on data. There's a danger that it might invisibilize the struggle, the people who actually struggle. I mean, let me just give you an example. For example, I mean, we have done a lot of stories about, say, migrants who went home and died on the way. we know these many people, for example, died, these many people died here, but we don't know their personal stories. Who are these people who died? What is their background? Where did they come from? What were their personal struggles? Do you think there's a danger of that? Because increasingly in the media, I mean, data journalism has now become kind of a separate beat. So do you think this is a danger that it might in the long run invisibilize these personal stories if we like concentrate too much on data?
Mehraj, I think the only category of stories we have done on migrants in the time of COVID is about the personal stories and ethnographies. We don't have stories regarding data. Is the only type of stories which we lack. So personal stories are very important and must be done. And this all sort of ethnomethodology or ethnographic stories are very precious. But still, the problem is if you don't have the big picture, from particular to general is the model we usually practice in these stories, even the personal stories. When we say this X person has suffered these problems, and this X is a representative image of this huge universe of persons or society, whatever. So I think data is important even after telling the personal stories. Personal stories are very important, and it I think those stories are being done, and it's good. The problem, Mehraj, is that why we are lacking data is more to do with who decides the subject matter. When the subject matter is scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, they are the subject matters. So we are not supposed, as a dominant group, we are not supposed to put our gaze on OBCs or upper caste. So we want to make them invisible, as if there is some sort of castelessness is there in other categories. So even if you see the curriculum of industrial psychology studies the psychology of labor, not of owners. So not having data regarding the domain or upper caste, whatever terminology you use, is to do with the concept of subject matter. So if you go to any library in any university, and I have checked it with more than 50 universities in India, you will not find many PhDs or MPhil dissertation regarding Brahmins or Kshatriyas or Myars or Chettiars or any dominant category. You will not find any study. But in JNU, we will find more than 300 PhDs on Dalits. So Dalits are being studied for the sake and for the benefit of, I think, upper caste. And as far as I know, in last 20 or maybe 25 years, only one PhD on the Brahmins. Dr. Berry has done it in, I think, in Belgaum University. So some categories are being studied. Data were collected regarding some categories, and other categories are considered casteless or general or other. Even if you see the nomenclature of this new category, EWS. EWS has been clearly defined as a category of lower income group who does not belong to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or OBC. So it's clearly upper caste poor if you use EWS for the poor. So it's upper caste category. But you use what? EWS. When you count others as SC, STs, OBCs, then others are, just see the politics of nomenclature. Semiotics, just see how it is being used. So not having data is not to do more with technology or difficulty in getting data, which government of India wants us to believe. Even, and I'm not putting blame on BJP or any other political party, even Congress and maybe third front governments, they never tried to collect data regarding all the social groups. So doing journalism in India without this sort of data is difficult, but still I think whatever data we have regarding scheduled caste and scheduled tribe should be used, and it hasn't been used. As in the case of, if you say the population in jail, NCRB has stopped giving data regarding the social categories there. Now you don't have the number regarding how many scheduled castes are there in the jail. And I think that's the only sphere where scheduled castes are having fair and better representation. So this sort of stories can be done only when the data is available. And I think whatever data is available, if some institution or university can make it usable for the journalist, that will be great help. We don't know when caste enumeration will be done in India, but whatever data is available, still that data is not being used properly and extensively. And I think there is still scope for using those data in a better way.
That's
Thank you.
Precisely what the IDP are seeking to do to plug that gap. So next question, you made an important point about subject matter, that it's not, when it comes to covering caste, it's not a subject that excites newsrooms, and that's in large part because Indian newsrooms aren't diverse. Newslaundry published a couple of reports last year about caste representation and gender representation in Indian newsrooms. I mean, those are, if you really look at those reports, they're horrifying. There's barely any diversity when it comes to caste and gender in newsrooms, especially in decision-making positions. So looking at that there's no diversity, and that is one of the reasons that caste doesn't get covered the way it should. Another problem at the same time, I mean, as unfortunate as it is, it's not going to be rectified overnight, that problem of diversity. So in the meantime, to sort of, in a way, rectify that to some extent, can data be used to sort of bridge that gap until we have the enough representation, then that it doesn't become this outlier issue, which is only covered when there's an atrocity or something like that?
Are you posing this question to me?
Yes. That was a follow-up question.
Okay, so what you are saying, I think, is correct, that whatever data is available, it should be used, and lack of diversity, when Cynthia was pointing towards that melody problem, I think this is a big problem, and we haven't discussed enough about. If you see in the case of US, after these Detroit and Chicago riots of 1966 and 67, the federal government there constituted a commission on civil disorders, and Otto Kerner was the chairperson of that commission, and they have articulated that lack of diversity in media in US is one of the prime cause of the disorder, because the underclass or ghetto people, they don't find their voice in the mainstream media. And after that, since 1978, US media, more than 900 publications, and all big publications, including Los Angeles Times and New York Times and all that, Wall Street Journal, they publish their sociological structure of newsroom year by year. And this is, I think, they are doing since until last year. We have the data of the sociological composition of their newsroom. But in India, I think that debate is still not there. Though in 1996, Washington Post South Asia Bureau Chief Kenneth Cooper has initiated this debate in India. And after that, B.N. Unyal has written a piece in Pioneer in 1996 that there is not a single Dalit journalist in national media. And since then, so many studies have been done, one by Yogendra Yadav, Anil Chamadia, and Jitendra Kumar. The CSDS was part of that data collection. And latest is the Newslaundry report. I think that's very comprehensive, and it's more comprehensive than any other study in India. So I congratulate Newslaundry for that. And with this composition, what you have in Newslaundry has underlined, almost 70, 80s, and somewhere 90 or 95% of the decision-making positions are the small sociological category, Hindu, upper caste, male, this small sociological category with not more than 5, 6 or 7% of the population, they control around 70 to 80% newsroom posts as far as the decision-making posts are concerned. So not seeing the data related to caste, I think this has something to do with the lack of diversity also. And you have rightly said that there is no magic bullet. We just can't, it's not possible to do away with and restructure it. And it's not a small task, and it will not happen in 2 or 3 years, but a process to start. And the initial thing I would suggest that we should try to have a situation where newsrooms can at least say that, look, this is our sociological composition. We want to have diversity, but this is it. We are here. So I think this is first step towards having a diversified newsroom. And a diversified newsroom, I think, will be able to do data journalism regarding caste in a more comprehensive and diversified manner also. And it's not about having reservation or something, but yeah, so some sort of solution we should find, because not having voice of almost 80% of Indian population or 85% of Indian population in Indian media is not a good thing for Indian media and Indian media business also. That's why we have YouTube channels like Shudra or National Dastak having millions of views, and this is a sort of what has happened in US, like Negro Press or Chicago Defender and Ebony. This sort of Negro press was there because white press was not able to represent their voice. So that is my take on this diversity and data and journalism. This is the intersection I think we should think of. Without that, I think even if you have data, and data journalism is not being done regarding caste is not the case. All the political reports, if you check, maybe I don't have empirical data, but 50% talks about caste. इतने जात के लोग यहाँ पर इतने हैं, इस कंस्टिट्यूएंसी में इतने हैं, यूपी में इतने दलित हैं, इसके पास जाएंगे, वो उसके पास जाएंगे. So it's not that caste is not there as a category in journalism, but that is being done without proper data, and there is a politics of this data also, and some castes are the numbers are inflated, and yeah, I think this again a bit problematic thing.
All right, Cynthia ji, as a researcher, as a journalist, if I were to ask you to identify one big problem, one major problem that you see with how the media covers caste, what would it be?
I think the biggest issue here is who does the journalism? Who is the journalist doing the journalism? I don't think, for instance, men can't cover women's issues. They can. And I don't think that non-Dalits can't cover Dalit issues. They can. But, the kind of sensitivities that are required, those have to be sharpened. And I believe that our education system and our social, the way we are socialized, inures us to a lot of the ground realities, particularly of the marginalized. And we who belong to the vulnerable sections, we are taught to, modify the way we interact with the world around us in terms of the food we eat, the language we use, what we will talk about, the subject of what we talk about in a broader context. Whereas it's very different when we are in our own way of, in our own social struggles. So therefore, what happens is, when we ourselves are shaping up to a sort of a imagined mainstream reality or a social context, then naturally the media spaces also will elide certain or hide certain things and highlight certain things in in stereotypical ways. For instance, the rape is a big issue that women always talk about. The rape of Dalit women is very much talked about in the media, but the talent and the capabilities of Dalit women are not talked about, because the mainstream media is willing to look at Dalits as victims, but not as achievers. No, very rarely you see positive stories on Dalits. You will always see them as victims. So this sensitivity that, that there are other sides to this question has to be understood, and that will not be understood by people who have not had any exposure or entry into the day-to-day lives of people from marginalized sections. Another point which I think here when we talk about caste, I see caste as a larger context of marginalization and of majoritarianism, looking down or looking at putting the others under its magnifying glass. And that is why we saw Mr. Dilip ji talking about how Dalits, 300 PhDs on Dalits versus 1 PhD on Brahmins. The point is that, when are we going to put ourselves under the magnifying glass on the one hand, and on the other hand, when are we going to allow the others to, that gaze, the gaze of the vulnerables to fall on us? When are we going to do that? That is the big issue. That is the gap. Those are the biases. Those are the blind spots which make it difficult for us to report. And I think the big gap, or the biggest blind spot, I would say, is also similarly the minority nations. In North India, there is a tendency by the media to sort of totally other the minorities, that is the Christians and the Muslims. And so they are only seen in their as Christians are people who convert. They're ordinary people who go to work and have children and study and struggle and everything, and they have biases. They face certain issues which can talk about, but no, they're only seen as people who convert. Muslims are seen as very, very conservative people who would like to see their women in hijab, and there's so much of stereotyping, and this is also a sense of the majoritarian bias that has steeped into the media. And I think I know a lot of Muslims here in Karnataka who are in the media, who do a great job. They're in the Kannada media. There are lots of Muslims in the south who don't speak Urdu. They have native languages. They're Tamil speaking Muslims and Malayalam speaking Muslims and Kannada speaking Muslims and Beri speaking Muslims. So they're not. It's not. Muslims are not just one homogeneous group. Similarly, as I pointed out, that the Dalits are not homogeneous either. They have lots of, specificities. And so I think this broad perspective is lacking in our present day newsrooms. And I think the ownership is one aspect of it, that the ownership is in a particular or only among certain people. But as you pointed out, that has also created a difference where lots of, like, the digital media has more diversity, I would say. And also there are specific, like Dalit Dasak, then, other, there are two circles, which are run by Muslim, owners, but do a very great job. And then there's Dalit Camera. So now slowly, a little by little, 20 years down the line, we all started, talking about this 20 years ago, but down the line, we are seeing minority groups setting up their own media houses and trying to make a go of it. They may be struggling, but see, again, the government has come down very heavily on funding of digital media, because at every level they're trying to hem in journalism and the messaging that is going out. I think that is something
that's a larger problem. But that's obviously a problem. मीना जी, जैसे आप अभी बता रही थी कि डेटा न होने की वजह से जो स्टोरीज हैं, जो मार्जिनलाइज लोगों की स्टोरीज बताना मुश्किल हो जाता है. अभी हम बात कर रहे थे कि डाइवर्सिटी नहीं है मीडिया में, और अगर आपको एक्यूरेटली लोगों की स्टोरीज बतानी है, मार्जिनलाइज लोगों की स्टोरी बतानी है, तो उनकी रिप्रेजेंटेशन होनी जरूरी है न्यूज रूम में. अब जो नए नए लोग, नए नए जर्नलिस्ट आ रहे हैं, चाहे वो दलित कम्युनिटीज से हूँ, मुस्लिम कम्युनिटीज से हूँ, क्रिश्चियन कम्युनिटीज से हूँ, ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज से हूँ, अपनी स्टोरीज बताने के लिए, अपनी कम्युनिटीज की स्टोरी बताने के लिए उनको डेटा जर्नलिज्म में ट्रेनिंग देनी कितनी जरूरी है, ताकि वो एक्यूरेटली और बिल्कुल एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर अपनी स्टोरीज बयान कर सके, ना कि जस्ट लाइक एक टोकन, जैसे कई बार होता है कि बस एक टोकन रिप्रेजेंटेशन है और टोकन स्टोरी आ गई तो काफी हो गया।
बिल्कुल, जो नए लोग आ रहे हैं, मुझे लगता है मुझे भी जो है डेटा जर्नलिज्म सीखने की ज़रूरत है, क्योंकि हम जैसे लोगों को भी नहीं आती अभी। जैसे अभी डेटा की भी कमी होती है कास्ट पे, लेकिन और जगह जैसे होती हैं, डेटा होते हैं, लेकिन पता ही नहीं चलता वो डेटा कब, कहाँ, कैसे मिलेगा। काम करते करते हम लोगों को तो सीखने को मिल जाता है मौका, लेकिन जो अभी नए आ रहे हैं वो कैसे सीख पाएंगे? तो इसके लिए अलग से प्रैक्टिस होनी बहुत जरूरी है कि वो कब, कहाँ से ऐसा डेटा निकाल सके जो ऑथेंटिक हो। ये नहीं कि विकिपीडिया जैसा कोई डेटा निकाल लिया तो वो ऑथेंटिक नहीं माना जाएगा, उसका पता ही नहीं है कब कौन एडिट कर देता है। तो वो चीज़ जानना बहुत ज़रूरी है, क्योंकि आज भी जो है कई लोग विकिपीडिया पे ही डिपेंडेंट रहते हैं। तो हमें ऐसी जगह ना रह के गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर के ही जो वेबसाइट हैं वहाँ से हमें डेटा की ज़रूरत होती है, और ये नए लोगों को सीखने की बहुत ज़रूरत होती है। अभी जैसे बताया कि डेटा जर्नलिज्म हो ही नहीं रहा है क्योंकि डेटा अवेलेबल नहीं है। अभी कोविड के टाइम पे भी जैसे हमने देखा था कि जो मजदूर गए, अपने अपने घर गए, सरकार ने साफ कह दिया कि हमारे पास कोई आंकड़ा ही नहीं है, कौन गए, कितने गए, तो ये कैसे पता चले? तो इसको पता करने के लिए कहाँ से पता किया जाए, कैसे पता ना किया जाए, तो इसके लिए मुझे लगता है ट्रेनिंग तो होनी ही चाहिए, चाहे वो जो नए नए लोग आ रहे हैं, और जो कोर्स भी अगर कर रहे हैं तो उसमें भी सीखने की ज़रूरत है कि डेटा कब, कहाँ, कितना इम्पोर्टेंट हो सकता है अपनी स्टोरीज को जो है मजबूत बनाने के लिए।
Thank you. Let me take a couple of questions from our viewers. Dr. Ashwini, this question is for you. Thanks for an enlightening discussion. It's from Nita. Thanks, Nita. Could IDP provide reading resources on the challenges of gathering and sharing data on caste?
I'm afraid not. And I'm terribly sorry for disappointing anyone. But the India Data Portal is the India Data Portal. It's not about readings. The idea is very simple. It's that just like Meena ji just mentioned, if someone were to go and access data from the government website, and suppose that data was available for the context and it was usable, it is not available in a format that can be quickly used. So the idea of the India Data Portal is to bridge that gap so that a journalist who is facing a 48-hour deadline to file a story doesn't have to also struggle with the data. PDF download किया या Excel download किया, फिर उसको समझने में 2 घंटे लगाया, किसी को phone किया. Better than that, we have done all that work and put it on the India Data Portal so that the journalist doesn't have to spend that work. And we stand, of course, we stand as our own guarantor that we will only provide data from the sources, and the sources are always provided in terms of this ministry, and this website is where we have taken this data from. But the readings part becomes very subjective, because how can we put some readings and not others? How can we be the judge and jury and executioner? Because if we exclude some reading, that person will be, I think, justifiably angry with us for not including it. So we don't provide any reading material, we only provide data.
All right. There's another question from Balaji S. He wants to know, do you have any system to examine the quality of the data in terms of accuracy, clarity, and the rest?
Oh, yes, we spend a lot of time cleaning the data and compiling it. There are a lot of simple mistakes that are corrected. There is a lot of data that is simply because someone slept on the keyboard and there are 500 zeros and so on. So that is easy to deal with. Some data is just plain bad, and we all know where that is. we try to exclude. Our first step is to exclude that data and say that it's NA, not available. Better say not available than provide bad data. But
when you say, just let me interrupt you. When you say it's bad data, what exactly do you mean?
We call these anomalies, and these are of course recorded on the website in the source what we have done to the data. So anomalies, if the price of groundnut is between 30 and 70 rupees a kg, and suddenly in one day, in one mandi, it is 700, we flag that as an anomaly, that this is a mistake, and we don't include it.
All right, thanks.
Those kind of things. But I want to take another minute to respond. What we also want to do is put government data there even when it is bad, so that journalists can point out that this is bad data.
Yes.
Because
that's a story.
The measure of accountability. The government has to be held accountable for bad data. And who else is going to do it if not journalists? We can't run away from bad data that the government produces, because it allows it to go on producing bad data.
Dilip ji also mentioned, Cynthia ji also mentioned, one, there is not enough data on caste from the government, but whatever data there is, how much of it is like what you describe as bad data?
It varies widely. There are some sources that are very good. So National Sample Survey Organization, the census, the agriculture census, these are Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Rural Development. These data sets are very, very good. They are very competent teams in both at the central and state levels. And these data sets are almost without mistakes. So they have internal systems. There are other data sets that are, I'm afraid, changing almost at the either personal whim or some external whim. So NCRB data, for example, cannot be compared across years because they change categories. So it's hard to say, is it bad data? Is it politically motivated changes? But from a data point of view, it's hard to include it because the categories themselves are changing. In some cases, we decide that there are some parts of it that are reasonably good, and others we just decide to put it as it is, with the caveat that we are not responsible for the quality of data.
All right. There's one question is from Shweta Singh. Do you also have data on media, for example? To what extent a newspaper covered migration during lockdown? Do you have such data?
Not yet. So
No.
it's also a slow unfolding. We have started with agriculture and financial inclusion, expanding to rural development. Now we are going deeper. Right now it is only at the district level. Now in the next iteration, we will go down to the block, tehsil or panchayat and village level, wherever data is available. We are now focusing on caste segregated and gender segregated data, because it is available in some cases, and wherever it is available, we should not give it up because it is not everywhere. So all in good time, but right now we are not covering media coverage.
There's a question related to when you... Yes, Dilip ji, yes, of course.
Ashwini ji, whatever data you are using, is it totally and completely government data, or some other institutions which are of repute, are you using their data also? Like as in the case of Ashoka University has some data on caste, CSDS has data, is collecting data on caste since I think many years they have done it. So is it only all the data is are from the government sources, or you have some data from other institutions, NGOs or universities or institutions also?
Right now, it is only government data and only central government data. There are two further additions. One is we are working with state governments to create state-specific portals. and in local languages or the language that they prefer to be reported in. The second is to collaboratively produce data. So for example, the Trivedi Center for Political Studies at Ashoka University has very good election data, and we are working with them to create a separate portal within the India data portal for Trivedi Center data that can be visualized. And the advantage there is anyone who uses that data can link it to other data sets that are on the India data portal.
Fine.
So we will work with institutions in collaborating so that we will give our data to them and they will provide their data to us. But that is in the
Thank
next.
you.
Binil has a very pressing concern. He wants to know if IDP will always be free. Do you plan to have a subscription?
IDP will always be free.
That's good to know.
So we have a very strong open data community that is helping us and guiding us. And we are committed to making, this is public data, so it should be free even if it's a private entity providing it. The government should be providing it, but until then we will provide it.
All right. Venkata Rao Krishnamurthy asks, how good is unemployment data given that India has a huge unorganized sector? You have collected data on unemployment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we have, and it's somewhat old. We know unemployment data is not available, and PLFS has some measure of it, and it's better for the formal sector. But given that we have such a high percentage and proportion of informal sector employment, the data is only indicative. Any confidence in the data is not very meaningful.
Aditya wants to know if there is some information on workshops, hands-on sessions on data journalism happening in India. I think you mentioned at the beginning that you are conducting some sessions.
So yeah, there is a training tab on the India data portal where all this information is available. We are collaborating with, of course, Newslaundry in planning these kind of trainings in multiple languages. And we are also collaborating with India Spend in providing trainings in data journalism.
All right, thanks. There's this one question which is not directly related to the topic, but I think it's an important question. Cynthia ji, if you could just respond to this quickly. It is from Binel. With recent law on reservation in private sector in Haryana, how practical is it? And is it going in the right direction when it comes to reservations and social justice?
See, one has to first understand the meaning of reservation. Reservation is not a poverty alleviation scheme or anything. It's an attempt to correct historical wrongs. That has to be first understood. It's not, I know that there is this general feeling of resentment in the general category that it's taking away something, which belongs to them. The fact is that this is to try and restore a sense of balance to what was traditionally basically reserved for the privileged communities. So education used to be the preserve of the, privileged communities, dominant groups and elite castes and classes. And by providing some kind of constitutional measure to enable those from, underprivileged sections, vulnerable sections, marginalized sections to get into the mainstream through education and jobs, it was the idea thought of. So I want to say that that has to be first understood. And also reservation in the private sector is very, very important response to the kind of privatization that has been taken up after economic liberalization. As you can see, the power sector, even the core sectors in our country, in the economic sphere, banking is now becoming increasingly private. The power generation has become private. All the construction, coal, everything is being privatized. So in such a context, and we know that if you look carefully at the data, this data, again, the invisibility of data also hides certain facts. And that is who is running the business in our country. The same categories of Brahmins and Baniyas continue to rule the roost. The privileged sections, the which castes continue to rule the roost in management and in access to capital and, all the kind of resources that are needed, economic capital, social capital required to run businesses in this country. As a result of that, only those from, it says good. If you see advertisements also, you will see, they should come from good social background. We have had, the Sukhdev Thorat's Indian Institute of Dalit Studies did a very well-known, research, a survey on how people get hired. So the same biodata resume was with a Muslim name, a Dalit name, and an upper caste name was sent to various, institutions. And who got called for the interview that was analyzed. So it showed clearly that there was an upper caste bias in hiring. And so the people who had Dalit names were hired less, and Muslims' names were even less, and exactly the same qualifications. So there is a strong bias within our culture. And I think reservation in such a context makes some kind of sense. I don't know to what extent it will be fairly implemented, but at least the intent may be to.
But the idea in principle, it's a good idea.
Mehraj,
yes,
please. Yeah, Mehraj, I think what the question Benil asked is in itself very problematic, because we are discussing caste and data and journalism here. And Mehraj, Benil has raised the issue of reservation in private sector in Haryana, and that reservation is about the local candidates also only. This is reservation for 75% of the private sector jobs will be reserved for Haryanvis. I think that this has nothing to do with caste. But still, the problem, why Benil has raised this question, because when we talk about caste, we talk about only two things: discrimination or atrocity, and reservation. As if Dalits or OBCs, they don't marry, they don't play, they are not into entrepreneurship or whatever. So it's a limited gaze is there on these communities. And if you see, if somebody does the content analysis of all the stories related to caste, you will find these two categories: atrocity and reservation, that will occupy more than 80%, maybe, I don't know, but this is my hypothesis that that will occupy more than 80% media space as far as caste topic is concerned. So this is one rejoinder, that Haryana reservation has nothing to do with caste. It's about the jobs being given to local candidate only. But still, you see how problematic it is.
Yeah.
When
Indeed,
caste
actually,
is discussed, you discuss reservation.
Yes, actually, why I wanted to ask that question, I mean, it's not related to caste in particular, but I wanted to ask that question to sort of ask, because I mean, there has been a demand and there has been a movement for having caste-based reservation.
Yeah, I agree with the articulation of Cynthia.
Why I ask that is because in India, most of the media, almost all of the media is in the private sector.
Yeah, I know.
So because, I mean, the media has practically failed to ensure there is diversity, the people from marginalized communities are represented. So if there was a legal mandate that you have to have reservation, that could maybe, do you think that could sort of rectify that problem we have?
I agree with the articulation of Cynthia ji, that the diversity should be there, and if government can legislate, that will be good. And another thing I think I must underline, that Cynthia ji said that with the advent of digital media and social media and Facebook and Twitter and all that, that space is a bit more diversified than the legacy media. I think this is not the case. And I have collected data regarding all the journalists in India having more than 1 million followers on Twitter. And the list I have got of 20 most followed journalists in India, 19 of them belong to Hindu upper caste. So I can take the name: Rajiv Sardesai, Harsha Bhogle, Barkha Dutt, Rajat Sharma, Sudhir Chaudhary, Rahul Kamal, Anjana Om Kashyap, Veer Sangvi. And so that hegemonic structure of legacy media or traditional media has been reproduced, and that has become extension of the legacy media. So digital media is, it seems, it at the surface of it, it seems that it's diversified, but you just scratch the surface and you will find the same hegemonic structure operating here in digital media space also. So they are the influencer who are editors in legacy media, and those social groups, those social groups are still dominating the. So with the technology, the dominating structure hasn't changed. The domination hasn't changed. So this is another pointer I want to raise.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
मीना जी, आप इस पे कुछ बोलना चाहेंगे कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर में कास्ट रिजर्वेशन, माइनॉरिटीज रिजर्वेशन अगर हो तो उससे मीडिया में जो डाइवर्सिटी की प्रॉब्लम है वो किसी हद तक सॉल्व हो सकती है। लेकिन मैं आपसे गुजारिश करूंगा कि आप ब्रीफली अपने ख्याल बता दें, क्योंकि हमारे पास टाइम बहुत ही कम है अभी।
बिल्कुल प्राइवेट सेक्टर में तो होना ही चाहिए, क्योंकि देख अभी जो हम लोग देख रहे हैं कहीं पर भी जो है SC/ST लोग है ही नहीं। चाहे कहीं पर भी चले जाइए, सुप्रीम कोर्ट चले जाइए, यूनिवर्सिटीज चले जाइए, मीडिया में चले जाइए, मीडिया पे बड़े लेवल पे कोई है ही नहीं। और जो सरकारी हैं वहाँ पे हैं आरक्षण की वजह से हैं, और धीरे धीरे वो जो है आरक्षण भी खत्म हो रहा है, क्योंकि प्राइवेट को है जो सरकार जो है हर जगह प्राइवेट कर रही है, चाहे वो रेलवे हो चाहे कोई भी हो, तो धीरे धीरे वो चीज़ें खत्म हो जाएगी। और जब इस तरह के लोग आएंगे ही नहीं तो उनका प्रतिनिधित्व कैसे होगा? वो लोग किस तरह से अपनी बात है जो अपने समुदाय की बात है वो रख पाएंगे, या उनकी बात जो है कभी सुनी जाएंगी? तो मुझे लगता है कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर में भी ये सारी चीज़ें होनी चाहिए। वो मीडिया में हम लोग देख ही रहे हैं कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर और यहाँ पे वो लोग है ही नहीं, और भी जगह लोग नहीं हैं। तो जब लोग ही नहीं होंगे तो उनकी बात रखने वाला कोई है ही नहीं। तो बिल्कुल रिजर्वेशन प्राइवेट सेक्टर में भी होना ही चाहिए।
Thank you. I think one last, this is not a question so much as it's a request for Dilip ji. This is from Sujit Kumar. He says, respected Dilip Mandal sir, please come back to Twitter. Please, please, please.
I don't know how to answer this question, but
you can just say if you are coming back or not.
Yeah, I will let you know. I will let everybody know. When I'll be there, everybody will be able to notice me. Thank you for the concern and all that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for this discussion. Really
thank you, Mehraj.
Grateful to all of you for a very lively and very informed discussion. Thanks again.